Welcome to Dreamscribe, your companion on the journey to peaceful sleep. Before you drift off, don't forget to like and subscribe. It helps this calming community grow. Where in the world are you tuning in from? I never believed in the whole energy of a place thing. A campground is a campground, no matter how many ghost stories get attached to it. That's what I told myself as I pulled into Crescent Pines Campground, a remote site deep in the woods, tucked away from civilization. I had been driving for hours, looking for a quiet, isolated spot to park my RV for the night. Crescent Pines wasn't even on my original route. My GPS glitched out somewhere on Highway 22, and before I knew it, I was following a small wooden sign nailed to a tree, barely visible in the dimming light. Crescent Pines, campground 2 miles. I hadn't planned on staying here, but something about the place felt inviting. The kind of quiet that settles deep into your bones, like the whole world had paused. The first thing I noticed when I arrived wasn't the remoteness, or even the fact that there was no one else here. It was the fire. There it was at the center of an old fire pit, a steady, crackling flame. It burned confidently, as if someone had just fed it fresh logs. But there was no one else around. No campers, no tents, no vehicles, just the fire, burning on its own. I frowned, stepping out of my RV. The ground crunched beneath my boots as I approached the pit. The flames danced, licking at the cool night air. The wood inside was blackened and charred, but it wasn't falling apart. There were no embers, no fresh logs. Just fire, suspended over the pit, as if it had always been burning. I checked my watch. 6:45 p.m. Sunset was creeping in, the sky bleeding into deep orange and purple hues. If there had been people here earlier, they had left without dousing the fire. Carelessness, I figured. Some campers probably left it unattended. Still, it didn't sit right with me. The air felt wrong. I don't know how else to describe it. Have you ever been somewhere so quiet that you start to hear things? Your own breath, your heartbeat, the distant rustle of leaves? That's what it was like. The fire crackled softly, but the rest of the world felt too still. I turned in a slow circle, scanning the tree line. Nothing moved. No birds, no crickets, not even the wind stirring the leaves. Just silence. The logical part of my brain told me to ignore it, to go inside, lock up, and get some sleep. But my gut was whispering something else. Something was off. I crouched beside the fire, extending a cautious hand. No heat. I yanked my hand back, skin crawling. That wasn't possible. Every fire has heat. Even small embers radiate warmth. But this? It was as cold as the air around it. A shiver crawled up my spine. My breath came slower. I exhaled, watching the misty vapor curl in the cold night air. Then, for the briefest second, I swore I saw something move inside the flames. Not embers, not smoke, something else. I straightened up fast, rubbing the chill from my arms. Nope, I muttered. Not doing this. I turned and walked briskly back toward my RV, pushing aside the irrational unease settling in my gut. Once inside, I locked the doors and drew the blinds. The fire's glow still flickered through the fabric, casting long, jittering shadows across the interior. I busied myself with dinner, something quick. A can of soup, a few crackers. Anything to distract myself. But as I sat there, spoon halfway to my mouth, I realized something. The fire was still the same size. It hadn't dimmed, hadn't grown, hadn't changed at all. I forced myself to ignore it. Fires burn. That's what they do. But hours passed, and every time I glanced outside, it was still there. Unmoving. Untouched by time. By midnight, my exhaustion won over my nerves, and I settled into my small bed. I told myself I was overreacting. Maybe the logs were coated in something that made them burn longer. Maybe I'd check again in the morning, and it'd be nothing but ash. I shut my eyes, listening to the distant pop and crackle of the flames. I swear I heard something whisper. A sudden awakening. I woke up to a soft glow inside my RV. My stomach twisted as my gaze darted to the windows. The blinds were still down. But the light, it was inside. A deep, pulsing orange glow flickered across the walls. I sat up fast, heart hammering. I fumbled for my flashlight, shining it toward the interior of the RV. Nothing. But when I turned toward the small kitchenette, I saw it. The firelight was flickering on my stove. Like it was burning there. Like the flames had somehow moved inside. I scrambled back, breathing hard. My fingers dug into the mattress. This isn't real. It's a trick of the light. But the glow pulsed, steady, alive. Then, 3 soft knocks on my door. I froze. Someone was outside. The fire? A person? My own sanity slipping? I swallowed hard and forced myself to move. My legs felt numb as I stepped toward the door, gripping the handle. I hesitated. The knocks came again. Soft. Slow. Knock. 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 I took a deep breath and yanked the door open. No one was there. Just the fire. And for the first time that night, I saw footprints in the dirt, leading toward the fire, but none leading away. A fire that never dies. I didn't sleep after that. I kept every light on, every door locked. But no matter where I looked, the fire was there, burning, watching. Morning finally arrived, but the fire remained. Not smaller. Not dying. Exactly the same. That's when I noticed something worse. The footprints? The ones leading toward the fire? They were mine. I should have left that morning. I should have gotten in my RV, started the engine, and never looked back. But I didn't. I don't know why. Maybe it was curiosity. Maybe it was exhaustion. Or maybe something wanted me to stay. The fire doesn't change. I spent the morning watching the fire. It still hadn't burned down. It was the same height, the same brightness. The logs inside should have been nothing but ash by now, but they weren't. They sat blackened but whole, like time had no effect on them. I even checked my phone, searching for any explanation. Maybe there was some kind of special wood, some chemical trick that kept logs burning for longer. But nothing I found explained what I was seeing. I tried rationalizing it. Maybe someone was secretly maintaining it. But how? There were no new logs. No fresh embers. And worst of all, no one else here. I stepped closer, staring into the flames. My pulse thumped in my ears. It wasn't just fire. There was something inside it. A flicker, a shadow moving between the flames. The moment I noticed it, it noticed me. I stumbled back, my breath catching. But as soon as I blinked, the movement was gone. The fire crackled like normal, as if nothing had happened. I felt sick. My body was telling me to leave, but my mind was heavy, fogged over, like my thoughts weren't entirely my own anymore. I had this terrible feeling, like the longer I stayed, the harder it would be to go. An unsettling discovery. I decided to explore the campground. Maybe I was missing something. The place was old, too old. The cabins, picnic tables, even the wooden sign at the entrance were all weathered, rotting at the edges. It looked abandoned, but that didn't make sense. If this place had been empty for years, then who kept the fire burning? I searched for signs of life, any sign that someone else had been here recently. Nothing. No footprints. No tire tracks. Not even an old beer can or cigarette, but no one had been here in a long time. That's when I saw something strange. Behind one of the rundown cabins, I found a half-buried metal sign. I bent down, brushing dirt away, revealing the faded words underneath. Crescent Pines Campground, closed permanently 1984. I swallowed hard, my hands suddenly clammy. 1984? No, that wasn't possible. There was no way the fire had been burning that long. Was there? The trail that led to nowhere. I turned, scanning the tree line. There had to be a reason for all of this. A path stretched beyond the fire pit, winding deeper into the forest. It was overgrown, barely visible under layers of dead leaves. But something about it pulled at me. I didn't want to go, but my feet moved anyway. I walked for what felt like hours. The trees loomed taller, the air growing colder. The deeper I went, the quieter it became. Too quiet. No birds. No insects. Not even the crunch of leaves beneath my boots. I stopped, suddenly aware of my own breathing. Then I saw it. A second fire. Deep in the woods, just ahead of me. Same size. Same shape. Same unchanging flames. My blood ran cold. How was that possible? I turned back, ready to run. But the first fire? The one by my RV. It was still visible. From here. From deep in the woods. Like it had followed me. Like it was everywhere. My stomach twisted. This wasn't right. I ran. I ran faster than I've ever run before. The trees blurred past me, my lungs burning. But no matter how far I ran, no matter how many twists and turns I took, the fire was always there. Waiting. Watching. I burst back into the campground, gasping for air. I threw myself against my RV, chest heaving. The fire was still burning. Unchanged. Unmoved. A message in the ashes. That's when I noticed something new. In the dirt beside the fire, words had been drawn in the ash. I didn't put them there. Don't feed it. I staggered back. Don't feed it? What the hell did that mean? I stared at the words, heart hammering, waiting for something, anything, to move. Nothing did. Then, as I watched, the letters slowly faded. The ash settled, undisturbed, like the message had never been there. But I knew what I saw, and I knew what it meant. Something was hungry, the fire that breathes. I locked myself inside the RV. I paced back and forth, running through every possible explanation. I had no cell signal, no GPS. The road I came in on, it felt different now, like it wasn't real anymore, like I'd never actually driven here. As night fell, I checked the fire again, still burning. Then it happened, a shift in the air, a sudden, unnatural stillness. And then, the fire breathed. I swear on my life, it inhaled, like it was alive, like it was waiting for something. I stumbled back, gripping the doorframe of my RV. My vision swam. I felt drained, like something was pulling at me, leeching away my energy. The fire crackled, and for the first time I heard it. A voice. Come closer. A whisper. Inside my own head. I slapped my hands over my ears, my breath coming in sharp gasps. This isn't real. This isn't real. I squeezed my eyes shut, willing the voice away. Then, just as suddenly as it came, the presence lifted. The fire settled, burning steadily again, like it had never moved at all. Something is out there. I didn't sleep. I stayed up all night, clutching a knife in one hand and a flashlight in the other. At some point, I must have dozed off, because I woke up to something scraping against my RV. Long, slow scrapes, like fingernails against metal. I held my breath, every muscle locked in terror. The sound stopped. Silence. Then a single knock. Soft. Slow. Knock. 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 I squeezed my eyes shut, willing myself not to move. The knocking stopped. I waited. Minutes passed. Then an hour. Eventually, I forced myself to peek through the blinds. Nothing. But outside, in the fire pit, the fire was still burning. Waiting. I had to leave. But something told me. It wouldn't let me. I should have left. Every nerve in my body screamed at me to pack up and drive as far as I could from this cursed place. But something, some force, was keeping me here. It wasn't just fear. It was control. And I was no longer sure if my thoughts were my own. The fire wants something. Morning arrived, but it didn't bring any relief. The fire was still burning. Still the same height. Still the same shape. I stood at the edge of my RV's doorway, gripping the frame like I needed to hold on to something real. I had left it alone all night. I hadn't gone near it, hadn't touched it. But the moment my feet hit the ground, the fire flared. A gust of heat surged outward like a breath, like it knew I was awake. I swallowed hard, my skin prickling. It reacted to me. No, I was imagining things. I forced myself to take a slow, steady breath. Maybe it was just the wind. Maybe I was overthinking everything. Maybe. Then I noticed the footprints. Not mine. Not from last night. They were fresh. A circle of footprints surrounding the fire. Bare feet. Too many of them. And they weren't leading toward the fire. They were coming from it. My stomach lurched. I stumbled backward, slamming the RV door shut behind me. My hands trembled as I locked it, heart pounding so hard I thought my ribs might crack. I wasn't alone here. Lost time. I stayed inside the RV for hours, refusing to move. At least, I thought it was hours. But my phone said otherwise. 8 a.m. I stared at the numbers on the screen, my pulse hammering. That wasn't right. I had woken up at dawn. I had been pacing, thinking, staring out the window at that damned fire for what felt like half the day. But according to my phone, only minutes had passed. I checked my watch. Same time. I turned on the RV's built-in radio, scanning for anything, news, music, static, anything that proved I was still in the real world. Nothing. The dial spun endlessly, but there was no signal. The time on the radio screen, 8 a.m. I slammed my fist against the dashboard, a cold sweat breaking out along my spine. Time wasn't moving. Or worse, it was moving wrong. Outside, the fire hadn't budged. Hadn't burned down. Hadn't changed. I squeezed my eyes shut. I needed to leave. Now. The road that led nowhere. I climbed into the driver's seat, my hands shaking as I turned the key. The RV rumbled to life. Relief flooded through me. The sound of the engine, the vibration of the wheel beneath my grip, it felt real. I was real. I pressed down on the gas. The RV lurched forward. I was moving. I was getting out. I was. Back at the fire. I hit the brakes, so hard I nearly slammed my head against the steering wheel. No. I had driven straight out of the campground. I had followed the dirt path leading back to the highway. I knew I had. But somehow, I was back in the same exact spot. The fire still burned, mocking me. I turned the wheel sharply, heart racing. Took a different route. Kept driving. 10 minutes. 20. 30. Back at the fire. My breath hitched, panic squeezing my chest. I tried again. And again. Every time, no matter which path I took, I always ended up back here. The campground was a trap. And I was stuck inside it. The shadow in the flames. I sat in the driver's seat, staring at the fire through the windshield, my fingers gripping the wheel so tightly they hurt. I didn't want to look, but I had to, and that's when I saw it. Something was inside the fire. Not just a flicker, not just a shadow, a shape, a figure shifting between the flames. Tall, thin, unmoving, watching. It had been there the whole time, watching me. My body turned ice cold. I couldn't breathe, couldn't move. The thing inside the fire was waiting. And the worst part, I felt like it was familiar, like I'd seen it before, or like it had seen me. A long time ago, voices in the night. I didn't leave the RV after that, not when the sun started setting, not when night came. The fire never dimmed, never faded. It burned just as bright, just as hungry. Sometime after midnight, I started hearing the voices. At first, they were soft, whispers through the trees. But the longer I listened, the more I realized. They were coming from the fire. They were calling my name. I clamped my hands over my ears, shutting my eyes tight. It's not real. It's not real. The whispers grew louder. And then, the knocking started. Soft. Slow. Knock. 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 I bit down on my lip, forcing myself not to react. Then, the door handle turned. I barely swallowed the scream rising in my throat. The door didn't open. But the knocking didn't stop. Knock. 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 I wasn't alone. Something was trying to get in. Something that had never left. Something is changing. Morning came. Or at least, I think it did. The fire was still there. The knocking had stopped. But something was different. I felt weaker. Like something had drained me overnight. Like I had lost a part of myself. The fire crackled. For the first time, I saw the logs inside. They were gone. The wood that had never burned, the unchanging pieces of fuel, vanished. And in their place, something else was burning. I leaned closer, my stomach churning. It was me. I saw my own shape inside the fire. My own body. My own face. Burning. Changing. Disappearing. And in that moment, I understood. I was feeding it. Piece by piece, the fire was eating me. And I didn't know if I could stop it. The fire was alive. Not in the way any normal flame flickered with life. Consuming wood, needing fuel, this fire breathed. It watched. It fed. And now, it had started feeding on me. The reflection in the flames. I stood frozen in front of the fire, watching my own face burn inside it. It wasn't just an illusion. It was real. I could see my features flickering within the twisting embers, my eyes hollow and empty, my mouth moving even though I wasn't speaking. The fire wasn't just burning, it was absorbing me. I staggered back, my breath ragged. My arms felt weak, my legs unsteady. It was like I had lost something vital, something I couldn't name. Like a part of me had already crossed over. And the fire? It was stronger now. Brighter. Hungrier. I had to end this. Now. Destroying the fire. I scrambled back into my RV, throwing open every cabinet, every drawer. I needed something, anything, that could put out the flames. A fire extinguisher. A bucket of water. Dirt. Anything. My fingers wrapped around a full water jug. I rushed back outside, heart hammering, and hurled the water straight into the flames. For a moment, the fire hissed. Then it roared. The flames shot higher, angrier, surging like a living thing. A wave of heat blasted me off my feet, slamming me backward into the dirt. It wasn't just resistant to being put out. It fought back. I gasped for air, my lungs burning. The fire wanted to survive. It wanted to grow. And the only fuel it wanted was me. The phantom campers. The heat inside the RV became unbearable. I couldn't breathe. Couldn't think. Then, I saw them. Through the windshield. Standing at the edge of the fire. Figures. People. Dozens of them. Their faces half lit, eyes dark and hollow. They were campers. People who had been here before me. People who had been taken. Their bodies flickered like they weren't fully there, their outlines shifting with the fire's movement. They were trapped. Consumed. And I was next. The final choice. I had to make a choice. I could stay in the RV, let the fire take me like it had taken all of them. Or I could run into the fire myself. I didn't know why I thought it. Didn't know why it felt right. But something told me that if I stayed still, if I let the fire come to me, I would be lost forever. I had to face it. I took a deep breath. Then, I threw open the RV door and ran straight into the flames. Inside the fire, heat consumed me instantly. I should have burned. Should have felt pain. But instead, I felt nothing. The world around me shifted. The campground was gone. The RV was gone. I was standing in a different place entirely. An endless black void, speckled with dying embers. And standing in front of me was myself, or at least the thing that looked like me. Its skin was cracked like burnt wood, its eyes glowing like embers. It smiled, and in its voice, asterisk asterisk my voice, asterisk asterisk it spoke. You were always meant to be here. The trap. I couldn't move, couldn't speak. The thing that looked like me took a step closer. You don't remember, do you? It asked. I shook my head, my breath coming in short gasps. It gestured around at the darkness. This place takes people. People who stray too close. People who see too much. People who never leave. It tilted its head. You've been here before. My mind screamed no. That was impossible. But deep down, I knew it was true. Memories surfaced. Flashes of other times. Other lives. Other campers. I had been here before. And each time, I had burned. The ending that never ends. The thing that looked like me laughed. Not cruelly. Not mockingly. Just patiently. You can run again, it said. You can try to escape. But you'll always come back. I wanted to deny it. Wanted to scream that it wasn't true. But the fire had already started to fade around me. The void crumbled. The flames returned. And suddenly, I was back at my RV, standing at the edge of the fire, watching it burn. Just like before. Like I had never left. Like I had never escaped. Because maybe, I never had. The loop begins again. I stood at the edge of the fire, my breath ragged, my body shaking. It was like I had never moved. Like I had never tried to escape. I had run into the flames, seen the truth, faced the thing that wore my face, and yet, here I was again. Back where I started. The fire crackled in front of me, throwing twisted shadows across the empty campground. It was waiting. Familiar patterns, fading memories. I staggered back toward the RV, my mind scrambling for answers. Had it all been a hallucination? A fevered dream brought on by exhaustion and paranoia? But my body told me otherwise. My skin felt raw, my muscles ached, and deep inside, there was a heaviness like something had been taken from me. Something I couldn't name. I stepped inside the RV, locking the door behind me, even though I knew it wouldn't matter. Outside, the fire burned on. The missing time. I checked my phone. 3:17 a.m. That didn't make sense. I could have sworn it had been past dawn when I ran into the flames. I had felt the sun burning against my skin. Had I blacked out? I checked my call history. My last call was days ago. How long had I really been here? A deep unease settled in my chest. Time wasn't working right. Or maybe I wasn't working right. I pressed my forehead against the window, peering outside. The fire flickered, its flames too still, too perfect, like they were waiting for something. I scanned the rest of the campground. Empty. But I knew it wasn't. I had seen them. The phantom campers. The ones who had been taken. They were still here. Just hidden. I had to prove it to myself. I had to see them again. The whispering embers. I stepped outside, the night unnaturally quiet. Not a single cricket. Not a whisper of wind. Only the sound of the fire breathing. I moved closer. Heat licked at my skin, but I ignored it. The fire knew me now. And as I stood there, staring into its depths, I saw them again. The campers, half hidden in the flames. Their faces flickered like dying memories. They were watching me, waiting for me. The fire's secret. A thought slid into my mind, not my own. The fire was a doorway, a passage, not just to another place, but to another existence. The people who had vanished hadn't just burned. They had become part of it, and so had I. The realization struck me like a punch to the gut. I wasn't me anymore. Not completely. I had left something behind in the fire, and now it was waiting to take the rest. The reflection that wasn't mine. I stumbled back to the RV, heart pounding, but as I reached for the door, I saw myself in the window, and my blood turned to ice. It wasn't just a reflection. It was the other me, the one I had met inside the flames. The burnt version, charred skin, hollow, ember-filled eyes, and it was smiling. The impossible choice. I yanked open the RV door, but as I stepped inside, everything shifted. The walls rippled like heat waves. The ceiling melted. And suddenly, I was back outside, standing at the edge of the fire, like I had never moved, like I had never escaped. The horror of understanding. I staggered back, horror creeping up my spine. It wasn't just a place. It was a cycle, a trap. I wasn't the first, and I wouldn't be the last. I looked down at my hands. The skin was darkening, splitting, filling with embers. The fire wasn't just watching me. It was changing me, and soon I would be just another face inside it. The last words, a voice whispered in my head, my voice but not mine. It never goes out. The fire crackled in response. A laugh, a hunger, a promise. And as my vision blurred, as the heat became me, I finally understood. I had never escaped. I never would, and neither would the next person who came here. Next story is, I've spent the last 3 years traveling in my RV, chasing the solitude of the open road. There's a certain comfort in the rhythm of it, long stretches of highway, pit stops in small towns, and the occasional night at a campground when I need a break from truck stops and rest areas. I thought I had seen it all, but last week I pulled into a campground that changed everything. It wasn't on my map. That was the first red flag. I had been driving for hours, the blue haze of twilight settling over the road, when I saw a battered wooden sign pointing toward a place called Still Hollow Campground. My GPS hadn't mentioned it, and I was sure I'd driven this route before without ever seeing it. But exhaustion was settling deep in my bones, and the thought of pulling over for a quiet night's rest was too tempting to resist. I followed the winding dirt road through dense trees until I reached the entrance. A tall, weather-worn gate stood open, its hinges creaking softly in the evening breeze. Beyond it, rows of RVs were parked in neat lines, each with its lights on, illuminating the gravel roads in a sterile, artificial glow. I slowed to a crawl, scanning the area. Something felt off. Despite the well-lit interiors, I saw no movement inside any of the RVs. No figures passing by windows, no shifting shadows. Just empty spaces, as if the lights had been left on in a hurry. I found an open slot near the middle of the park and pulled in, shutting off my engine with a sigh. Stepping outside, I stretched my arms and took in the surroundings. The air was unnaturally still, the kind of silence that presses against your ears and makes you feel like you're underwater. No insects chirping, no rustling leaves. Just the low hum of electricity buzzing from the park's power hookups. A small wooden office stood near the entrance, the windows dark. I figured I'd register in the morning and went back inside my RV. That's when I noticed another strange thing. I wasn't tired anymore. The exhaustion that had dragged me off the road just an hour ago had vanished. Instead, I felt wired, like I'd downed 3 cups of black coffee. I checked my phone. No service. I flicked through my radio stations, but every channel was static. Leaning back in my chair, I stared at the other RVs. Every single one still had its lights on. And then, I saw something. A shadow moved past one of the windows in a nearby RV. Just for a split second, my heart lurched. I sat up, squinting at the window. Nothing. The shadow hadn't returned. Had I imagined it? I wasn't sure, but suddenly, I had the overwhelming sense that I was being watched. I stood and pulled my curtains shut. My fingers hesitated over the lock on my door before I clicked it into place. The buzz of the campground's lights hummed through the walls, filling the air with a tense, electric charge. Then, at exactly midnight, something changed. All at once, the lights inside every other RV shut off. But mine stayed on. I kept telling myself I was imagining things. The quiet RVs, the strange lights, the absence of movement. Maybe these people were just keeping to themselves. Maybe it was nothing. But the more I watched, the harder it became to ignore. That night, I tried to sleep, but the glow of the other RVs leaked through my curtains like some unnatural moonlight. I turned over again and again, but every time I closed my eyes, I felt it, that indescribable unease, the sense that someone was watching. Or worse, that something was waiting. I got up and walked to the window, squinting at the rows of parked vehicles. Every single RV was still lit up, casting strange shadows across the empty lots. The lights inside flickered sometimes, as if someone was moving around, but the windows were tinted too dark to see inside. And still no sound. No movement. No sign of life. I checked my watch. 2:47 a.m. I should have gone back to bed, but something compelled me to go outside. The first attempt to find others. I stepped out into the night, the cold air wrapping around me like a warning. The gravel crunched beneath my feet, sounding impossibly loud in the silence. I walked up to the nearest RV, a silver airstream with soft, yellow light spilling through its closed blinds. The door was shut, and I hesitated before knocking. 3 slow raps. Nothing. I knocked again, harder this time. "Hello. Sorry to bother you, but..." A shadow flickered behind the blinds. I stepped back. Someone was inside, but they didn't answer. My mouth went dry. Maybe they were asleep, or ignoring me, or... A sudden click made me jump. It came from behind me. I turned sharply, staring at the next RV over. The door handle had moved. I was sure of it, but the door never opened. The lights inside flickered. I could almost see movement through the curtains. My pulse quickened. I backed away, telling myself I was overreacting. I just needed to leave them alone, go back to my own RV, and get some sleep. But as I turned, my foot hit something. A shoe. Just one. A worn-out sneaker, lying in the gravel beside the airstream. I frowned. It wasn't mine. It was too small. A woman's shoe, maybe. I looked around, suddenly hyper-aware of the eerie emptiness of the campground. Had someone lost it? Had someone left it? I didn't want to think about that. Shoving my hands into my hoodie pocket, I forced myself to walk back toward my RV, ignoring the creeping sensation crawling up my spine. But as I reached my door, I heard something. A soft, rhythmic creaking. It came from behind me. I turned my head slowly. One of the RV doors, just a few spots down, was rocking open, swinging an inch or two before gently closing again, like someone had just stepped inside. But no one had been there. I held my breath, feeling my stomach twist. Maybe it was the wind. Maybe I just hadn't noticed someone returning to their RV. Maybe. The silent campground. Back inside my own RV, I locked the door and pulled the blinds shut. But sleep wouldn't come. I kept listening, waiting. The campground remained eerily quiet. No talking, no TVs, no footsteps crunching on the gravel outside. Just the occasional creak of an RV shifting on its tires, the flicker of fluorescent light against dark windows. At 4 a.m., I finally crawled into bed, exhausted but restless. That's when I heard it. A door clicking open. Not mine. Somewhere outside. And then a single footstep. Then another. Slow. Unhurried. Moving past my RV. I held my breath, my body frozen. I couldn't see anything through the blinds, but I could feel it. Someone was walking the campground. Alone. I waited for them to pass. But they didn't. The footsteps stopped right outside my RV. A heavy silence followed. I didn't move. I barely breathed. Then, a knock. Soft. Deliberate. Right against my door. I clenched my jaw, my heart hammering. I didn't answer. Another knock. And then a voice. Not a normal voice. It was quiet. Hollow. Come outside. I bit down on my lip, squeezing my eyes shut. No. Silence stretched. Then, I heard them walk away. Slow. Unhurried. Until the footsteps faded. I stayed in bed, gripping the blanket tight. I didn't move again until the sun started creeping through my blinds. Morning comes, but no answers. I forced myself out of bed as soon as daylight filled the campground. I told myself it was fine, that I'd imagined it. But when I stepped outside, I felt the same unease clawing at my stomach. The campground was the same. Same rows of RVs, same empty spaces between them, same glowing lights inside each one. Except now I noticed something else. One of the RVs was gone. Not packed up, not driven away. Just gone. The gravel lot where it had been parked was empty. No tire tracks, no sign that anything had been there at all. I walked toward it slowly, trying to remember if I'd noticed who had been staying there. I hadn't. In fact, I couldn't remember seeing anyone at all since I arrived. That's when I saw it. Another shoe, lying in the empty lot where the RV had been. I felt a chill crawl up my arms. I swallowed hard and turned in a slow circle, scanning the rest of the campground. No people, no movement, just the lights, humming softly inside their RVs. I needed to leave. I hurried back to my RV and jumped inside, locking the door behind me. I grabbed my keys, started the engine, and the GPS flickered on. I hadn't touched it. A low, static hum crackled through the speaker. Then, in a flat, mechanical voice, "Where do you want to go?" I stared at the screen, my pulse racing. The words glitched, shifting slightly. "Are you sure you want to leave?" I swallowed hard. My hands clenched around the wheel. Something was very wrong. But I wasn't staying to find out what. I threw the RV into gear and pressed my foot to the gas. As I pulled out of my spot, I caught one last glimpse in my side mirror. The other RVs stood still, their lights glowing, silent. But in one of the dark windows, I swore, just for a second, I saw someone standing there, watching me go. I should have left the moment I realized something was wrong. I should have driven straight out of that campground, no questions asked. But I didn't, because something wasn't letting me go. I don't mean physically, my RV was still running. The road was right in front of me. But as I sat behind the wheel, staring at the rows of silent RVs, a strange, overpowering hesitation rooted me in place. It wasn't fear, exactly. It was something worse. Curiosity. That gnawing, insidious need to understand. I gritted my teeth and forced myself to look away, to focus on the road. My hands tightened around the wheel. I pressed my foot on the gas. The RV didn't move. The engine was running. The dashboard lights glowed. I checked the parking brake, off. I tapped the gas pedal again, harder this time. The tires spun uselessly against the gravel. I was stuck. I frowned, shifting into reverse. Nothing. I tried again, still nothing. It was like something unseen was holding the RV in place. My stomach twisted. I didn't want to look back at the campground, but I did. And the second I did, I knew I had made a mistake. Something had changed. The RVs were no longer still. Their interiors flickered with movement, shadows shifting, silhouettes gliding past the tinted windows. No faces, no bodies, just the impression of something stirring inside. I sucked in a sharp breath, my pulse pounding in my ears. No one was here. No one was ever here. And yet, a low hum filled the air. I turned sharply toward my GPS. The screen flickered again, the text distorting before shifting into something new. Don't leave. I swore under my breath, reaching out and yanking the GPS plug from the dashboard. The screen went dark, but the hum didn't stop. It grew louder. I realized, with dawning horror, that it wasn't coming from the GPS. It was coming from outside. The endless glow. The RV lights, once steady, began to pulse, slowly at first, then more erratically, like a heartbeat out of rhythm. And then just as suddenly, they all went out. Darkness swallowed the campground. I sat frozen in my driver's seat, gripping the wheel so tightly my fingers ached. Then movement. A shadow peeled itself from the nearest RV and stepped into the open. I felt my breath hitch in my throat. It was a person. A man I thought tall, thin. But there was something wrong with him. His features were blurred, indistinct, as if I was looking at him through warped glass. He turned his head slowly toward me. And suddenly, all the lights snapped back on. The RVs hummed to life again, glowing in perfect, eerie unison. But the man was gone. The missing tracks. I was shaking. I reached for my phone, desperate to call for help, but there was no signal. Not even a single bar. I had to think. I forced myself to step out of the RV. My boots crunched against the gravel as I turned in slow circles, scanning the lot. The shoe was still there. The one I had found where the missing RV had been. I bent down, hesitating before picking it up. It was damp, like someone had just been wearing it. My eyes darted to the ground. No footprints. Not a single mark in the gravel. I swallowed hard. That wasn't possible. I took a step back, and that's when I heard it. A whisper. So faint I almost missed it. Right behind me. I turned sharply, nothing. Just my RV, standing silent and still. I was losing it. I had to be. I shook my head, exhaling shakily. I needed to get help. I needed to find someone. And against all logic, against every screaming instinct in my head, I knew I had only one choice. I had to knock on another RV's door. The first door. I approached the nearest RV, my hands clammy as I raised a fist to knock. 3 slow taps. I stepped back, holding my breath. No answer. I knocked again. This time, something shifted inside. A shadow passed by the window. I swallowed hard. Hello? My voice was barely a whisper. The door creaked. Not open, just slightly loose, as if someone on the other side had been about to open it but stopped. I waited. Nothing happened. I reached forward and nudged it with my fingertips. The door swung inward with an agonizingly slow creak. Inside, empty. A small kitchenette. A table with 2 chairs. A couch with a blanket draped over it. And the lights. The humming, flickering lights. I took a step inside. My foot brushed against something soft. I looked down. Another shoe. Identical to the one I had found outside. I stared at it, my stomach twisting. And then, the TV snapped on. I flinched, stumbling backward as static filled the air. The screen flickered, the image warped. Then, slowly, letters formed against the static, a message spelling itself out one broken fragment at a time. You are the only one left. A cold wave of nausea rolled through me. I turned and ran. Nowhere to go. I didn't stop running until I reached my RV, my chest heaving. I jumped inside, slamming the door shut and locking it. The lights outside still burned. The silent RV still stood, untouched and undisturbed. But something felt different now. I wasn't just being watched. I was being waited for. The GPS flickered again, even though I had unplugged it. The screen glowed faintly, the same distorted text crawling across the display. You can stay, or you can join them. My pulse thundered in my ears. I looked back toward the campground, toward the flickering windows and the shifting shadows inside. And then I understood. The RVs weren't empty. The people were still inside. They just weren't people anymore. A wave of dizziness washed over me. My body felt heavy, sluggish. I swayed where I stood. The humming from the lights seemed to vibrate through my bones now, an endless, droning lullaby. I didn't even realize I had started walking toward the nearest RV until I caught my own reflection in the window. I looked pale, unfocused, like I was already disappearing. A shadow shifted behind the glass. I turned and ran, blindly this time, knowing if I stopped, if I hesitated for even a second, I would never leave this place. Not as myself. Not as anything. I scrambled into the driver's seat, my hands shaking as I turned the key in the ignition. The engine roared to life. The tires, finally freed, rolled forward. I didn't look back, not even when I heard the last whisper, barely audible through the static hum. Come back when you're ready. I was almost free. The tires crunched over gravel as my RV inched toward the exit. My hands trembled on the wheel, my breath coming in short, panicked bursts. The campground was behind me now. At least, that's what I told myself. The glowing RVs, the flickering windows, the shadows that moved where no people should be. It was all fading in my mirrors. But the humming remained. It pulsed through the air, through the RV, through my bones. I could feel it rattling inside my skull, a deep, vibrating thrum that refused to let go. I wasn't safe yet. I didn't know if I ever would be. I tightened my grip on the wheel and focused on the road ahead. The entrance to the campground was right there, the worn wooden sign just visible in the dim glow of my headlights. I pressed harder on the gas. The RV didn't move any faster. I frowned, pressing harder. The speedometer stayed locked at 10 miles per hour. I slammed my foot down. Nothing. The engine roared, the tires spun, but the RV crawled forward at an agonizingly slow pace, like something unseen was holding it back. My stomach twisted. I looked at the side mirrors, half expecting to see something clawing at the back of the RV, dragging me down. But the campground was still behind me. And that's when I realized something was wrong. The exit that wasn't there. The road stretched ahead, long and empty, the exit sign flickering faintly. But it never got closer. I was driving. I was moving. But the exit was always just ahead, just out of reach. I blinked, trying to focus, my breath coming faster now. The scenery outside the window, the tall trees, the wooden sign, the split in the gravel road, it all stayed the same. I wasn't leaving. I wasn't moving. I gritted my teeth and slammed the brakes. The RV lurched to a stop, the sudden jolt making my stomach flip. For a moment, everything was still. The humming in the air had stopped. The only sound was my own shaky breathing. And then, the lights outside all went out at once. I froze. Total darkness swallowed the campground. No streetlights. No headlights. No flickering glows from the RVs. Just pure, suffocating blackness. I reached blindly for my phone, fumbling with the screen. Still no signal. I turned my gaze back toward the windshield, my pulse pounding in my ears. A shape stood in the road ahead. A person. No, not a person. A shadow, tall and thin, its edges shifting like smoke. It didn't move, but I knew it was watching me. I couldn't see its face. There was no face, but I felt its gaze, heavy and suffocating, pressing against my skin. My hands were shaking so badly, I could barely keep them on the wheel. I should have turned around. I should have backed up and never looked back. But I didn't, because the shadow raised an arm and pointed. Not at me. At the campground. Go back. The meaning was clear, even though no words were spoken. The moment stretched impossibly long. And then, the lights all turned back on. Brighter than before, blindingly bright, forcing me to shield my eyes. When I looked again, the shadow was gone. But the road ahead was still the same. Still leading nowhere. still keeping me here. I was trapped. The last visit. A sickening realization settled over me. I couldn't leave. Not until I went back. My hands were ice cold as I shifted the RV into reverse. Gravel crunched beneath my tires as I backed up, the flickering glow of the RVs growing stronger around me again. I was right back where I had started. The humming in the air resumed. Louder, more insistent, like a warning, or a welcome. I pulled to a stop in front of the first RV, the one I had knocked on before. The door was still open, waiting. I swallowed hard and stepped out of my vehicle. The air was thick, electric, like a storm was about to break. I took slow, careful steps toward the open door. The lights inside buzzed faintly. The television was still on, the static shifting and twisting, forming words. Come inside. I hesitated at the threshold. The air inside was wrong. Thick, heavy, occupied. I knew I wasn't alone. I could feel them. Not just one. Not just the person I had seen before. All of them. The inhabitants of the campground. The ones who had been here before me. The ones who had never left. They were inside, and they were waiting. The final warning. A sound broke the silence. A low, distorted whisper rising from the static. I strained to hear. It was my own voice. You don't belong here. I shuddered. Then, from deeper inside the RV, a different voice. A woman's. Soft. Crooked. Wrong. You will soon. The lights flickered violently. And then, the door slammed shut behind me. The door had slammed shut. I spun around, heart hammering against my ribs, my breath coming in ragged gasps. My hands fumbled for the doorknob, fingers scrabbling at the cold metal. Locked. I pressed my ear against the door, listening for anything outside, footsteps, movement, anything. Nothing. Only silence. No, not silence. That humming. It had changed. Before, it had been distant, an atmospheric hum in the background, something I could ignore if I tried hard enough. Now it was inside the RV. It pulsed through the walls, through the floor beneath my feet. It wasn't coming from the television anymore. It was coming from the air itself. I turned, scanning the interior of the RV. Everything was the same. The flickering lights, the couch with the neatly folded blanket, the television still locked in a state of static. But it felt full, like the air had weight, like something unseen was watching me. I took a step forward. The static on the TV shifted. Black lines rolled through the screen, twisting and forming something new. Shapes, figures, people, a group of them, standing in the same RV, their faces blurred like a bad signal. I took another step closer. The figures on the screen moved. Their heads turned toward me. Something is here. I swallowed hard, my pulse a frantic drumbeat. The figures on the screen stepped forward, moving as one. They weren't in the TV anymore. I felt it. The air in the RV shifted, as if the space had grown smaller. I turned, and the hallway was longer than before. Stretched, twisted. Doors lined the walls, doors that hadn't been there when I walked in. They pulsed with the same humming energy, like they were breathing. I reached for one, pressing my palm against it. The second I touched it, a whisper slithered through my ears. You're not supposed to be here. My throat tightened. I yanked my hand back. The voice had been right next to me, but no one was there. The TV static flickered again, distorting violently. And then I saw it. My own face on the screen. A frozen image of me, standing exactly where I was standing right now. But in the screen, I wasn't alone. Behind me, just over my shoulder, was a figure. Faceless. Watching. Waiting. I didn't want to turn around. I had to. Slowly, heart pounding in my throat, I turned. Nothing was there. But the door I had come through was gone. Just a wall now. Smooth. Featureless. The only way out was forward. The campground won't let me go. I forced myself to move. The air grew heavier with each step, the hallway stretching further ahead, the RV defying all logic. I reached the next door. Pressed my ear against it. Silence. Then, a sound from behind me. A soft shuffle. My breath caught in my throat. I turned my head just enough to see. The couch. It was empty before. Now, a woman sat there. She faced the TV, her back to me. Still. Too still. I swallowed down the rising panic. Hello, I croaked. She didn't react. Didn't move. Didn't breathe. Just sat there, hands folded in her lap, eyes locked on the static. I stepped closer. My shadow stretched across the floor. The second it touched her, her head snapped around. Not turned, snapped. Too fast. Too sharp. Her eyes were gone. Just black, empty sockets, staring straight into me. She opened her mouth, but no words came out. Only the humming. Louder now. So loud I could feel it in my teeth. The lights flickered. The TV screen distorted. My own reflection stared back at me now. And then, the woman stood up. Not with normal movement. She glitched, jerking upright in a single, unnatural motion. I stumbled back, my spine slamming against the nearest door. Her mouth opened wider. Too wide. You will stay. The lights exploded. Darkness swallowed everything. I can't wake up. I don't know how long I was unconscious. When I came to, I was back in my RV, lying in my bed, like nothing had happened, like I had never left. For a brief, blissful second, I thought maybe it had all been a dream. Until I sat up, until I looked out the window. The campground was still there. The glowing RVs, the flickering lights, the doors hanging open, the empty spaces where people should be. I grabbed my keys, my body trembling as I stumbled toward the driver's seat. I needed to leave. Now. I turned the key in the ignition. The RV rumbled to life. I pressed the gas. The vehicle didn't move. I checked the gear. Drive. Pressed the gas again. The engine roared, but the scenery outside didn't change. I was still in the campground, still parked in the same spot. I pressed harder. The tires spun, but I went nowhere. The humming returned, louder than ever. I slammed my hands against the wheel, my breaths coming in short, panicked bursts. Then, a sound from outside. I turned my head toward the window. Someone stood beside my RV, right outside my window, their face hidden by the glare of the overhead lights. Watching, waiting, a knock on the glass. My stomach twisted. Slow, rhythmic. Knock, knock, knock. I couldn't move, couldn't breathe. The figure leaned closer. And then, I saw its face. My face. Not a reflection. Not a trick of the light. It was me, standing outside, looking in. Knock, knock, knock. The humming swallowed me whole. Next story. I'd been on the road for weeks, my only company the low hum of the tires against the asphalt and the static-filled mutterings of my old radio. The idea of stopping for the night at a real RV park, one with actual showers, working hookups, and a solid patch of ground beneath my feet, was more appealing than it should have been. I'd gotten used to parking in empty lots and forgotten rest stops, but exhaustion was creeping in, and the sign up ahead felt like a small miracle. Sunset Pines RV Park, vacancy. The letters were crisp, the paint too fresh. It didn't look like the sort of place that had been around for long, yet something about it felt old, permanent. I turned down the gravel driveway, the entrance flanked by tall pines that swayed lightly in the wind. A neat row of RVs stretched along a well-paved path, each parked in a designated slot like pieces on a chessboard. The air smelled of pine needles and something faintly metallic, like the scent before a thunderstorm. The office sat at the far end, a small, single-story building with a green roof and a single porch light glowing warmly. A handwritten sign in the window read "Check-in open." I parked, cut the engine, and stretched my legs as I stepped outside. The night was still, quieter than it should have been. There were other RVs here, at least a dozen, but no signs of movement. No flickering TV screens behind curtains, no laughter or idle chatter. Just silence. I pushed open the office door, and a bell overhead let out a hollow chime. Behind the desk stood the manager. Tall, thin, motionless. He wore a crisp button-down shirt, tucked too neatly into his slacks. His name tag, a simple white rectangle with black lettering, read Walter. His face was long, features sharp, skin too smooth. But it was his eyes that unsettled me the most, wide, unwavering, locked onto me the moment I stepped inside. He didn't blink. Not once. "Welcome," he said. His voice was even practiced. "Are you staying for the night?" I hesitated. Something about him made my skin itch. But fatigue won over caution. "Yeah, just for the night." He reached beneath the counter, pulling out a guest book and a pen. "Name?" I gave it. He wrote it down in perfect handwriting. No hesitation, no stray marks. Every letter was identical in size and spacing, as if printed. "You'll be in spot 13. His lips curled slightly at the corners, not quite a smile. "That one's a favorite." I forced a nod, took the small slip of paper he handed me with the Wi-Fi code, and turned toward the door. "I hope you enjoy your stay." I glanced back. He hadn't moved, hadn't blinked. The door shut behind me, the bell's chime echoing too long in the empty air. I drove to Site 13, the headlights cutting through the stillness. As I pulled in, I noticed something odd. The RV next to me was identical to mine. Same model, same faded paint along the edges, same dent in the side panel. Even the curtains drawn inside looked the same as mine. The sight sent an uneasy ripple through me, but I shook it off. Coincidences happened. RVs were mass-produced, after all. I plugged in the hookups, locked my doors, and sat at the small kitchenette table inside. Outside, the lamplight cast long, sharp shadows over the lot. A glance at the window showed the office still aglow. Through the glass, Walter was still standing at the desk, still staring straight ahead, still not blinking. I tried to sleep, but the silence outside felt wrong. In every other RV park I'd stayed at, there was always noise, dogs barking, music drifting through thin walls, the occasional hum of conversation. Here, nothing. Just the quiet hum of my own breathing, the faint creak of my RV settling. At some point, exhaustion won. My eyelids grew heavy, and I drifted into uneasy sleep. A sound woke me. Crunch. A slow, deliberate footstep outside my RV. My body went rigid. I didn't move, barely even breathe. The sound came again. Another step, then another. A slow, circling motion around my vehicle. I swallowed, pulse pounding. My mind raced for explanations. Maybe another guest taking a late-night walk, maybe an animal. But the steps were too controlled, too steady. They stopped at my door. I reached slowly for the curtains, pulling them back just an inch, just enough to see outside. A tall, thin silhouette stood motionless in the glow of the lamplight. Walter, staring, eyes unblinking, fixed directly on my window. I didn't move, didn't breathe. Neither did he. We stood there in silent standoff, separated only by a thin sheet of glass. Then, without a word, without a sound, he turned. His movements were slow, deliberate. He walked back toward the office, disappearing inside. The light in the office went out, and the park was swallowed by darkness. I didn't sleep after that. Morning came too slowly, the sky brightening to a dull gray. I stepped outside, heart still hammering from the night before. The office door was open again, its check-in open sign hanging perfectly straight in the window. Walter was behind the counter, standing in the exact same position as last night. His eyes locked onto me the moment I stepped outside, as if he'd been waiting, as if he'd never moved. I had to get out of here. I packed up my things, tossed them into the RV, and turned the key in the ignition. Nothing. The engine wouldn't start. I tried again, and again. The battery had been fine yesterday. I'd just driven in. But now, nothing. Not even a flicker of power. I glanced toward the office. Walter was still staring at me. Not moving. Not blinking. The weight of the situation settled in my gut. I wasn't leaving. Not yet. I'd have to go back inside the office. I'd have to talk to him again. After my initial unease about the RV park manager, I did my best to brush it off. Maybe I was just tired. Maybe the shadows had played tricks on me. But deep down, I knew something was off. I couldn't shake the feeling that there was something unnatural about him. His eerie stillness, the way his gaze seemed locked on me even when I looked away, and of course, the most disturbing detail of all, he never blinked. The next morning, the RV park was quiet. The air smelled damp from the night's rain, and a thin layer of mist clung to the treetops. I stepped outside to stretch, and was startled to see the manager already at his usual spot near the office, standing stiffly by the entrance as if he had never moved. His eyes were on me. I froze mid-stretch, my arms hanging awkwardly in the air. He didn't look away. Trying to shake the discomfort creeping up my spine, I forced a smile and gave him a small wave. No response. He just stood there. I hurried back inside and locked the door. The feeling of being watched didn't fade. Every time I stepped outside, no matter the time of day, he was there. If I went to the communal laundry room, he was standing near the office, hands folded neatly behind his back, eyes unblinking. If I drove into town and returned later, I'd find him in the exact same place, staring in my direction. At first, I told myself he was just keeping an eye on the place. Maybe he was just a weird guy with an unsettling demeanor. But as the days stretched on, it became impossible to ignore. He never blinked. Not once. I started watching him more closely, desperate to catch the tiniest flicker of movement from his eyelids. But there was nothing. His stare was constant, unwavering. Even when the wind kicked up dust or a sudden gust blew hair into his face, his expression remained eerily still. It wasn't normal. One evening, I decided to stay inside and keep my curtains drawn. The RV was cozy, my laptop glowing softly on the dinette table as I scrolled through emails. I tried to convince myself I was being paranoid, that I was letting my imagination run wild. Then came the knock. I nearly jumped out of my skin. It was a slow, rhythmic tap on the door. I hesitated, my pulse hammering in my ears. Through the small window, I saw him. The manager, standing completely still outside my RV, his hands still raised from the knock. My breath caught in my throat. He didn't say anything. He just stood there, staring. Summoning my courage, I forced my voice to stay even. "Can I help you?" He tilted his head, just slightly. His mouth opened, but the words that came out felt rehearsed. "Is everything to your liking?" His voice was low, monotone, too smooth, like a recording played on loop. I swallowed. "Yeah, everything's fine." He nodded, but the movement was stiff, unnatural. "Good." Then, without another word, he turned and walked away. I didn't sleep that night. The next morning, I decided I needed to talk to someone, another guest, anyone who might have noticed something strange about him. At the small communal coffee station near the front office, I struck up a conversation with an older couple who had been staying at the park longer than I had. "Hey," I said, forcing a casual tone. "That manager gives me the creeps. Have you noticed anything weird about him?" They exchanged a glance. The woman hesitated before answering. "You mean how he never blinks?" My stomach dropped. "So you've noticed it too?" I asked, trying to keep my voice steady. Her husband nodded, his expression uneasy. "Yeah, we've been here almost 3 weeks now. I don't think I've ever seen him close his eyes, not even for a second." The woman shuddered. "It's like he's watching everything at once." I felt a chill creep up my spine. "Has anyone asked him about it?" The man gave a dry chuckle. "No one wants to get close enough to do that." That was enough for me. I decided I needed to leave. That night, as I packed up my belongings, an uneasy feeling settled in my gut. The RV felt smaller than usual, the walls pressing in on me. Every shadow stretched just a little too long. Every noise seemed just a little too sharp. Then I heard it, soft, deliberate footsteps outside my RV. I stopped packing, holding my breath. The footsteps circled around, slow and methodical. I crept to the window and peeked through the curtain. It was him. The manager stood just outside, staring directly at my RV door. But he wasn't alone. Several other figures stood behind him, half hidden in the darkness. Silent, motionless. Their faces were difficult to make out, but their eyes, those empty, unblinking eyes, were locked onto my RV. I stepped back, my heart pounding. Something was very, very wrong. The RV park wasn't just eerie. It wasn't just strange. It was wrong. I had to get out, but something told me that wouldn't be as easy as I'd hoped. The unexplainable intensifies. The weight of unease settled in my stomach as I sat inside my RV, the curtains drawn just enough for me to watch the office without being seen. I hadn't seen the manager blink once since I'd arrived. That was strange enough. But now, something even worse was gnawing at me. He was always there. Every time I looked toward the small, dimly lit office, the manager was at his desk, motionless. Even in the dead of night, while other campers turned in for sleep, his rigid frame remained at the front window. His piercing stare never left the gravel road that wound through the park. At first, I told myself I was overreacting. Maybe he was just an insomniac. Maybe he was just a weird guy. But the hours passed. Then another day. He never left. I had spent an entire afternoon hiking the nearby trails, trying to shake the odd paranoia that had begun to cling to me like damp air. But when I returned, sweat drying on my skin, he was in the same spot, unmoving, watching. The front door of the office had a sign that read "Manager on Duty, 24/7. A joke, I thought at first. But now I wasn't so sure. I wasn't the only one staying at the RV park, but I seemed to be the only one who noticed the wrongness of the manager. The family two sites over cooked dinner on a portable stove, laughing and chatting like nothing was off. The retired couple a few spots down sat in fold-out chairs, flipping through a map of the area, planning their next leg of travel. No one seemed to care that the manager never took a break. No one talked about him. I decided to bring it up casually, hoping for some confirmation that I wasn't alone in noticing how bizarre it was. "Hey," I said to the man next to me at the communal fire pit that evening. "Have you seen the guy who runs this place? The manager?" The man, mid-sip of a cheap beer, barely glanced at me before shrugging. "Yeah, what about him?" He's always in the office. Never moves from that spot." Another shrug. "I dunno, man. Maybe he's just real dedicated." I let out an awkward laugh, waiting for him to add something, maybe a joke about how weird it was. But he just went back to his drink, as if what I'd said was completely normal. I tried again, this time with the retired couple the next morning. "You guys have been here a few days, right?" I asked, casually leaning against the picnic table. "Have you ever seen the manager leave the office?" The woman, squinting at me in the morning light, frowned slightly. "No, I don't think so. But I guess I never really thought about it." Her husband grunted, adjusting his glasses. "Huh, now that you mention it." A pause, then a shake of the head. "Probably nothing. Some people just take their jobs too seriously." I forced a smile, but something inside me twisted uncomfortably. Why did no one seem to care? The first night of surveillance. That night, I sat in my RV with the lights off, watching the office through my windshield. At exactly 1 a.m., the air in the park became eerily still. No wind, no chirping insects, just a thick, suffocating silence. The manager still hadn't moved. His face was just barely visible through the glass of his office, illuminated by the dim glow of the old desk lamp. I leaned forward slightly, heart pounding. That's when I saw it. His lips. They were moving. My breath caught. I strained to see better, to make out what he was saying. But there was no one else in the office. No phone in his hand. No radio receiver. Was he talking to himself? I shivered. Then, with no warning, his head snapped toward me. I yelped, jerking back. My breath hitched in my throat. Had he seen me? No way. My RV was parked in darkness. The curtains were barely parted. And yet, he was still staring. Right at me. My pulse thumped in my ears as I forced myself to stay still, barely daring to breathe. Seconds stretched into an eternity. Then, without blinking, his mouth moved again. This time I heard it. A whisper. Faint. Barely there. But it shouldn't have been possible to hear from this distance. My blood turned to ice. He was saying my name. Sleep didn't come that night. The manager's voice, so soft yet unmistakable, played over and over in my head. By morning, I was ready to leave. I had planned to stay for a few more nights, but something was wrong with this place. Something was deeply wrong. I packed up quickly, forcing down the unease pooling in my stomach. As I did, I caught sight of an old corkboard near the bathrooms, covered in faded photographs. Curiosity stalled my urgency to leave. I walked over, scanning the pinned-up pictures. They were all the same, a group photo of past campers, smiling at the camera. Each photo had a date written on the bottom. Some were decades old. Then my eyes landed on him, the manager. In every single photo, my chest tightened. It wasn't just that he was in them, it was that he hadn't changed. From the oldest picture, dated 1978, to the most recent, he looked exactly the same. Same unblinking stare. Same stiff posture. Uniged. I stumbled back. My breath came fast, my hands suddenly slick with sweat. This wasn't possible. It had to be a mistake. I turned, needing to get away, needing to put as much distance between myself and this nightmare as possible, and slammed right into someone. A firm grip caught my arms before I could fall. I looked up. My stomach dropped. The manager, standing right in front of me. For the first time, he was out of the office, and he was still staring, not blinking, not speaking, just watching me. I swallowed thickly, trying to steady my breath. "Leaving so soon?" he finally asked, his voice smooth, almost mechanical. I forced a nervous chuckle. "Yeah, just, decided to move on." His head tilted ever so slightly. "You only just arrived." Something about the way he said it made my skin crawl. I nodded stiffly. "Yeah, well, plans change." A beat of silence. Then he smiled. It was small, almost polite, but something about it felt wrong. Some people never leave. I blinked. "What?" He didn't answer. He just took a step back, gesturing toward my RV. "Safe travels." His voice was pleasant. Almost too pleasant. I didn't wait to respond. I turned and hurried to my vehicle, fumbling with the door lock before finally shoving myself inside. I fired up the engine, throwing one last glance toward the manager. He was still there, still smiling, still not blinking. The climax. I drove for hours. The road stretched endlessly ahead, a winding strip of cracked pavement cutting through an expanse of dense forest. I didn't know exactly where I was going, only that I had to put as much distance between myself and the RV park as possible. Yet, no matter how many miles I put behind me, I couldn't shake the creeping feeling that I was still being watched. I kept glancing in the rearview mirror, half expecting to see the manager standing motionless in the middle of the road. But the road was empty. I was alone. And still, I didn't feel safe. I pulled into a gas station around midday, the kind that looked half abandoned, with flickering fluorescent lights and a single rusted-out pump. I needed to get out of the RV, to stretch my legs, to breathe. As I stepped out, the cool air prickled my skin. I glanced around, scanning the lot, the road, the trees beyond. No sign of him. Maybe I really had escaped. I let out a breath I hadn't realized I was holding and stepped inside the gas station. The cashier barely looked up as I grabbed a few snacks and a bottle of water. I hesitated near the counter, debating whether or not to bring up the manager to see if anyone had heard of him. "Hey," I said, keeping my voice casual. "You ever heard of that RV park a couple hours back? The one near the old logging road?" The cashier frowned, finally looking up at me. "Can't say I have." Something about the way he said it made my stomach twist. "It's been around for decades," I pressed. "You really haven't heard of it?" He shook his head. "There ain't no RV park out that way." A cold shiver ran down my spine. "No, I was just there," I said, my voice coming out more desperate than I intended. I stayed a couple nights. There were other campers. There was a manager. The man's face darkened. "There's nothing out there." For a moment, neither of us spoke. The air between us felt heavy, charged with something unspoken. Then the bell above the door chimed. I stiffened. Someone had just walked in behind me. I didn't want to turn around. I couldn't. Every nerve in my body screamed for me to run, but I forced myself to stay still. Slowly, painfully, I turned my head. A man stood in the doorway. Tall, thin, stiff posture. He was wearing a crisp white button-down, just like before. His face was still, expressionless, and his eyes, wide, unblinking. The manager. My pulse slammed against my ribs. No. This wasn't possible. I had driven miles away. How was he here? How had he found me? His lips moved, and for a moment, I thought I heard him whisper my name again, though his mouth never fully formed the sound. I bolted. I shoved past the cashier, knocking over a rack of cheap sunglasses as I stumbled out the door. The second I hit the pavement, I sprinted toward my RV. My hands were slick with sweat as I fumbled for the keys. Every second felt stretched, elongated, my breath ragged as I yanked the door open and threw myself inside. The manager hadn't followed. Not yet, but I knew he would. I slammed the door shut and locked it, barely managing to shove the key into the ignition with my shaking hands. The engine roared to life. I didn't look back. I didn't dare. I tore out of the gas station lot, gravel spraying beneath my tires as I sped onto the highway. The trees blurred past. The sky darkened. The world outside became nothing but a smear of motion. I drove, and drove, and drove, but the feeling never left. That feeling of being watched. I didn't stop until I hit a small motel on the outskirts of another town. It wasn't much, just a few single-story rooms with peeling paint and a flickering neon sign. But it was enough. I pulled into the lot, exhausted beyond words. The woman at the front desk barely spared me a glance as I paid for a room in cash. I didn't even bother bringing my bags in. I just needed sleep. I locked the door behind me, shoved the flimsy chair against it for good measure, and collapsed onto the bed. For the first time in days, I let my eyes close. I should have felt relief. I should have felt safe. But then, a knock. Soft, gentle, at the door. I stopped breathing. Knock, knock, knock. It was slow, deliberate. I sat up, heart hammering, every muscle in my body tense. Maybe it was the motel clerk. Maybe it was another guest. Maybe. I turned my head toward the window. The blinds were open just a crack, letting in the dull glow of the parking lot lights. And through that narrow gap, I saw him, standing just outside the door, unmoving, unblinking. He had found me. I shot to my feet, backing against the far wall. My breath came in short, ragged gasps. This wasn't possible. I had left. I had escaped. I had driven for hours. And yet, he was here. The knocking stopped. Silence. Then, from the other side of the door, some people never leave. His voice was inside my room, right behind me. I turned, my body frozen in terror, and everything went black. The manager who never blinks. Open-ended or psychological horror conclusion. I woke up gasping. Darkness swallowed the motel room. My skin was slick with sweat, my heart pounding like a drum against my ribs. For a few seconds, I couldn't remember where I was. Then it hit me. The gas station. The drive. The motel. The knocking at the door. And him. I shot upright, my eyes darting to the door. It was still shut. The flimsy wooden chair was still wedged beneath the handle, exactly where I had left it. Had it been a dream? My entire body was trembling. My throat was dry, my muscles tight. Everything felt real, too real to be just a nightmare. I turned to check the clock on the nightstand, but there wasn't one. Actually, there was nothing on the nightstand at all. No lamp, no phone, no alarm clock. I blinked. That wasn't right. I could have sworn there had been a lamp when I first entered the room. I could have sworn the cheap plastic motel clock had been ticking away when I collapsed onto the bed. I turned slowly, scanning the rest of the room. The chair, the dresser, the bedspread, the same. But something felt off, like I was in a copy of the motel room, but not the real thing. I swallowed hard. Maybe I was just paranoid. Maybe I was still on edge from the whole RV park nightmare. Maybe I just needed to. Then I saw it. The mirror. It was positioned directly across from the bed, reflecting the darkened room back at me. And in that reflection, the door was wide open. My breath hitched. That wasn't possible. The door was closed. I could see it, right there, still shut, still locked, the chair still in place. But in the mirror, it was open. The dim glow of the parking lot lights spilled inside, stretching long shadows across the floor. And standing just beyond the threshold, the manager. His suit was crisp, unwrinkled. His eyes were impossibly wide, unblinking as he stared into the room. At me. I turned. The door was closed. But when I looked back at the mirror, he was inside the room. A strangled sound escaped my throat. I felt him now. The weight of his gaze. The stillness in the air. I didn't dare move. Didn't dare breathe. He wasn't supposed to be here. I had left. Then finally, he blinked. Just once. A slow, unnatural, mechanical blink. And suddenly, everything shifted. I was standing outside. The RV park stretched before me, bathed in the eerie glow of the street lamps. The office door was open. The neon sign buzzed softly. Vacancy. I took a step forward, gravel crunching beneath my boots. I didn't remember driving back here. I didn't remember getting out of bed. I didn't remember anything. And yet, here I was. The same eerie stillness settled over the place. The same faint scent of burning wood and damp earth lingered in the air. I turned my head slowly. Every RV was exactly as I had left it. Lights on, curtains drawn. Not a single person in sight. It was as if I had never left. As if I had been here the whole time. The door to the office creaked. And then, a voice behind me. Soft, cold. Checking in? I turned slowly. The manager stood there, his head tilted ever so slightly, his wide, unblinking eyes locked onto mine. My mouth went dry. I wanted to run. I wanted to scream. But I couldn't move. His lips curled into the faintest hint of a smile. Not a welcoming smile. Not a friendly smile. A knowing smile. Like he had been expecting this. Like he had been expecting me. Like I had never actually left. I opened my mouth to say something, anything. But I couldn't. Because in that moment, I saw something I wasn't supposed to see. In the office window, my reflection, standing right beside him. The realization slammed into me like a truck. The missing time, the strange motel room, the impossible mirror. I wasn't me anymore. I was still here. I had always been here. I was part of it now. I staggered back, shaking my head. No, I rasped. No, this isn't real. But the manager only smiled wider. And then in that same flat, mechanical voice, he spoke. Some people never leave. The world around me blurred. The RV park, the night sky, the neon sign. Everything stretched and twisted, folding in on itself like a collapsing dream. And just before everything went dark, I saw the other guests. Or at least, what was left of them. Shadowed figures inside the glowing RVs. Trapped, just like me. The end. Or maybe just the beginning. Because the next morning, a new traveler arrived at the RV park. They walked into the office, greeted the manager, and as they checked in, they didn't notice the new face in the window reflection behind him. Watching, waiting, because some people never leave. And now, neither did I.